Good. Please welcome Shawn Burgdorf.
Okay, well, I'm going to stand off to the side. So today my speech is a researcher topic, and I'll just give you a background. A lot of my research came from my finance book here, so this is where I'm basing some of it, as well as the internet and some of my own personal thoughts at the end. So today, with the recession of 2008 and 2009, many of us, I think all of us actually, lived through that.
I don't know, I failed Jesse's test.
Yeah. So I'm going to go through some of the major causes of the recession, discuss some of the economic impacts, get into a little bit about the governmental actions, and then some of my thoughts on where things are going in the future. Oh, too far. There. Major causes. Well, the one and first major cause that kind of got this thing rolling was back in the mid-1990s. The Senate and the legislature, along with the President, all signed into law some new standards and regulations that allowed subprime mortgages to be made by banks. And essentially what this did was it allowed banks to no longer verify income of people and to verify that they had actual jobs and things of that sort. And then it also allowed them to package new loans and new formats that, pushed, for instance, an ARM, adjustable rate mortgage, where it had low prices to begin with and pushed out, and then they eventually reset to higher prices. So these new things stimulated housing sales through the economy at the time, and it pushed a future issue of whether these individuals who now can get houses based on just what they say in the future to a default situation later. So that was the first thing. The second thing is that during the recession of 2001, due to 9/11, the Federal Reserve Bank, they slashed the Fed's funds rate. And this rate is the rate that banks lend money to other banks, and it's an interest rate that they pay. The lower this rate is, essentially, the lower the interest rate that you can get on a mortgage. So that, again, spurred new borrowers and new homeowners to get more mortgages and added to the increased housing ownership. The third cause is that buyers wanted more for less. Everybody saw everybody getting these big houses next door. If you can get housing prices were only going up. Everybody thought this. Homeowners did too. Why not get into a nice big house for 3 years? The housing price is only going to go up, sell it off, get a new mortgage. So the consumers were doing that. The fourth one, real estate appraisers, they didn't really have any incentive or disincentive to continue to have high appraisals. So when banks lent money or created the mortgages, an appraisal would just say, yeah, sure, housing prices are going to go up, I'll appraise it way up here and you can afford this house. They got paid for their service at the time. They didn't care about whether the loan defaulted or not. And that gets to the fifth one as well. These two went hand in hand. Originators didn't care about whether the mortgage was a quality one. A lot of times they just cared whether they made the mortgage happen. They got paid their initial payment. And a lot of times they would sell off the loans to third parties and they would continue to sell and repackage them. And the repackaging occurred and was able to occur because rating agencies gave all these mortgages high ratings. So not only were they making a lot of these junk loans or junk mortgages, the mortgages were backed up by the rating agencies as telling them that these mortgages were indeed high quality loans. So investors would then say, okay, I will invest in this. And the issue with that and why they did that is because there was a conflict of interest. Companies like Lehman Brothers, those type of companies that made the securities, paid the rating agency companies to verify that these mortgage-backed securities are good. So then investors would invest in it. So it was a big conflict of interest circle that occurred. So these were some of the major causes that led us to the recession and the defaults that eventually occurred. So what were some of the economic impacts? Well, once everybody realized they couldn't afford the pricing in the houses, nobody could sell their house for what they were worth, and the mortgages were all higher, the economic housing crisis, houses prices dropped. And so now no people owned and were underwater on their mortgages. Well, the drop in commodity prices, that occurred because now people had less money, they were out of jobs and things, and that might have actually been a good thing for people who still had jobs. And I remember when gas prices went down to $1.50, and that was actually a benefit at the time, but commodity prices dropped across the globe. The third thing here, 14.5 trillion drop in the value of global companies. So anybody who was a stock owner, when the market crashed, you remember it dropped probably 30 or 40%, and that's the total dollar amount of value of the companies that was wiped off the books. So people had less money to spend, and so the crisis compounded in that respect as well. The unemployment rate in the U.S., it peaked at 10% in October 2009. As many know, that's since dropped down to, I believe, 7.9% now, so that's improving. And the credit markets froze up. Banks stopped lending because now they were in trouble. They were going to go bankrupt if they couldn't recover their loans that they were making. So they started going back to the old way of making sure everything they lent was indeed a secure mortgage. And if not, then they just said no more. So those were some of the major economic impacts. So what did our government do? Well, near the end of George Bush's term is when we figured all this out. He started out with that $700 billion TARP initiative, which was a Troubled Asset Relief Program. And that program essentially was meant to buy these low-level mortgages from the banks so that they weren't on their books and allow them to continue to lend. So that was one initiative. Then Obama got into office, and he did his stimulus plan. If many of you remember, that was pretty fast after he got into office. $825 billion. It was supposedly meant to create 6.3 million jobs. I'm not sure if that number was actually hit. I mean, there was many numbers through this election cycle. You guys probably heard them all. Whichever one you want to pick is right. That's a hard one to come up with the right answer. So that went through. It was to help stimulate the economy. GM and Chrysler were given $13.4 billion in aid. There were new regulations to show clarity in Wall Street, like the derivatives that were created, all these mortgage-backed securities. Nobody knew who owned what and what was behind them. So that was created to show what people were investing in. The Fed slashed the federal funds rate down to 0. Now people were able to lend more money at low interest rates, stimulate the economy again. And then finally, the Fed ended up buying $1.2 trillion in debt off of these banks again, the mortgage-backed securities. They gave them this money, said, give me those mortgages, now lend that money out. So it was another way to try to stimulate the economy. Over. The next recession. This is where those of you who are very exuberant that Obama is elected, I believe we're going this way. Not that I want to be pessimistic here, but with all the government debt and the high borrowing amount that we're taking on right now, I believe this is what's going to lead to the next eventual recession, unless something is done about it. With the government debt, I mean, if another recession were to occur, let's just say it happens, the government won't be able to spend more to get us out of it. One way it could happen is if they raise higher taxes, so then they take money out now just to pay off what we already have. So that could lead to the recession. So the government actions, they won't have much at their disposal to use in order to fight another recession. The funds rate is already at 0. They can't lower it anymore. That won't be able to stimulate the economy. And increasing government spending, like I say here, will only exacerbate the problem because you got to pay that debt off. The debt's going to be higher interest money that people are willing to lend the government because it's riskier. So the only way the government's going to be able to pay this debt off is either through higher taxes, which will not stimulate the economy, or through inflation, which is another way. It's a back way of taxing people. But through inflation, they can print as many dollars as they want, pay off their debts, and say, now you saved $100, your dollar, that $100 is now only worth, you could buy, say a tank of gas with $100, now you'd have to buy a tank of gas with $300. I mean, that's essentially what would come out of it. So it's only going to hurt the American consumer. This is a tricky situation because nobody wants to raise taxes to pay off debt, and nobody wants to cut spending. That's the third way. And I'll leave it at that for everybody else to think. Where are we going in this country? Sorry it took a little long. Bye.